Long Island Long Island medium, Theresa Caputo realizes and embraces her self-worth after new BF Brandon's entry in her life. Hello views, after watching the video, you can gather some information, so please watch the video to the end. Theresa Caputo had always been the woman who gave her all to others. For years, she dedicated her life to connecting people with their lost loved ones, offering comfort, guidance, and closure. Her gift as a medium was more than just a career. It was her life's calling. But what she didn't realize was that while she was helping others heal, she had neglected her own heart, her own happiness. It wasn't until Brandon walked into her life that she began to see things differently. Theresa sat in her beautifully decorated Long Island home, sipping her morning coffee, scrolling through social media, and checking the messages from people who needed her. The requests for readings were never-ending, and she was grateful for her gift. But there was an emptiness she couldn't quite place. For years, she had been the strong one, the one who people relied on. Her marriage had ended, her kids had grown up, and though she was always surrounded by people, she felt alone in ways she couldn't express. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Blonde hair perfectly styled, nails manicured, and a warm smile that had become her trademark. But deep inside she wondered, was she truly happy? Theresa had gone to a charity event with friends, one of those fancy but casual Long Island gatherings where she could be herself yet still be in the public eye. She had no idea that night would change everything. As she was laughing at a joke one of her friends made, she felt a presence near her. Not a spirit, just someone new, someone with an energy she wasn't expecting. "Excuse me," a deep, warm voice said. "You must be Theresa." She turned and found herself looking into the kindest brown eyes she'd seen in a long time. "I am," she said, smiling. "And you are?" "Brandon. A friend of Lissa's," he said, gesturing toward one of Theresa's close friends. "She told me you're the life of the party, but I had to see for myself." Theresa chuckled. "Oh, she's a liar. I'm the most boring person here." Brandon grinned. "Somehow, I don't believe that." The conversation flowed easily. He wasn't just charming, he was real. There was something different about him, something that made Theresa feel seen. Despite the undeniable connection, Theresa found herself hesitating. She had spent so long putting others first that she wasn't sure she knew how to let someone in. Her past relationships had always been complicated. She had loved deeply before, but heartbreak had a way of making her guard her heart like a fortress. One evening, as she sat across from Brandon at a quiet restaurant, she finally voiced her fears. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. Brandon nodded, his eyes understanding. "That's okay. I'm not here to rush you. But I do want you to know something." "What's that?" she asked. "You deserve to be happy, Theresa. You spend so much time making sure everyone else is okay. Who's making sure you're okay?" His words lingered in her mind long after their dinner ended. No one had ever asked her that before. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have an answer. Theresa wasn't used to being on the receiving end of care. She had always been the healer, the fixer. But as her friendship with Brandon deepened, she found herself letting her guard down in ways she hadn't in years. One evening, as they walked along the Long Island shore, she spoke about things she never shared with anyone, her fears, her struggles, the weight of always being the strong one. Brandon listened. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't offer empty promises. He just listened. "You're not just a medium, Theresa," he said softly. "You're a person, and you deserve someone who sees all of you." She felt something shift inside her. Maybe for the first time, she truly believed that. As months passed, Theresa began to change, not in the way she looked, but in the way she carried herself. She laughed more. She allowed herself to be vulnerable. She stopped apologizing for putting herself first sometimes. Her work as a medium would always be her passion, but she no longer defined herself solely by what she did for others. She realized she was worthy of love, of happiness, of a life where she didn't always have to be the one giving. Brandon never tried to change her. He simply reminded her of what she had forgotten, her own worth. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her home, watching the sunset, Theresa turned to Brandon with a soft smile. "You know," she said, "I think I finally get it." "Get what?" he asked. "That I'm allowed to be happy." Brandon took her hand in his. "You always were. You just had to believe it." For the first time in a long time, Theresa Caputo felt whole, not because of a man, not because of her gift, but because she had finally embraced her own worth. And that was the greatest reading of all. The weight of the past presses down like an unseen force. In the quiet corners of his mind, Larry Caputo wrestles with the reality that the foundation of his relationships, once strong, once unshakable, has begun to crack. The question is no longer whether things have changed, but whether he can salvage what remains. For years, Larry stood in the shadow of Theresa Caputo, the Long Island medium whose gift and fame have placed her in the public eye. The world watched as she connected the living with the dead, offering closure, hope, and sometimes painful truths. But in the midst of all that, did something get lost? Did the connection between the two of them weaken, frayed by the very thing that made Theresa who she is? Blame is an ugly thing. It doesn't just point fingers, it digs deep, leaving wounds that don't heal easily. Larry isn't sure when the distance began, but he feels it now. Once his presence was enough. Now it seems like a shadow of what it used to be. Was it fame? Was it time? Was it something deeper, something unspoken? The cracks in their marriage were no secret. The world knew. Fans speculated. And yet, despite the speculation, despite the whispers, Larry never truly wanted to believe that the life they built together could fall apart. He wanted to believe that love could weather any storm, that history meant something, that their bond could hold against the weight of all the changes that had come. But now, standing at this crossroads, he wonders if he's been naive. Relationships don't survive on history alone. They need effort, understanding, and above all, they need two people who are willing to fight for them. Is there still something left to fight for? Larry knows one thing. Pointing fingers won't fix what's broken. He can blame Theresa. She can blame him. But blame won't turn back time. It won't change the reality that they are here, now, staring at a future that feels uncertain. Does he still have a chance to make things right? Can he be the man he once was in Theresa's eyes? Can he rebuild what seems to be slipping away? Or has the ugly finger of blame already sealed their fate? Only time will tell. The air was thick with unspoken words, a silence that carried the weight of years. Larry Caputo sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the soft hum of a distant television the only sound breaking through the stillness. He ran his hand through his silver hair, his fingers lingering at the nape of his neck where tension had made its home. He never thought he'd be here, at this crossroads, questioning everything. For decades, his life had been intertwined with Theresa's. Together, they had built a family, a home, and a life that once seemed unbreakable. But something had shifted. The bond they had once shared now felt like a frayed rope, barely holding on. The woman who had spent her days speaking to spirits had become a ghost in his own life, an untouchable presence that drifted just out of reach. Blame is an ugly thing. It slithers into the spaces between words, festering in silence, growing stronger with every unspoken resentment. Larry knew this. He had seen it happen before, in friends' marriages, in the stories of strangers. But he never thought it would happen to them. Theresa had always been larger than life. Her gift had propelled her into the public eye, turning her into the Long Island medium, a woman with the ability to connect the living with the dead. People adored her, trusted her, and clung to her words as if they were their last hope for closure. And Larry, he had supported her every step of the way. He had been the steady presence behind her, the man who held it all together while she chased her calling. But when does support turn into sacrifice? When does standing by someone become standing in their shadow? Larry wasn't sure when he first began to feel it, the slow erosion of his place in her life. Maybe it was in the long nights spent alone while she traveled for work. Maybe it was in the way her eyes lit up for strangers in a way they hadn't for him in years. Or maybe it was in the way conversations had become surface level, stripped of the depth they once shared. It wasn't that he resented her success. He was proud of her. But somewhere along the way, they had stopped being partners and had become something else. Two people coexisting rather than truly living together. And then came the whispers. Not from the spirits Theresa spoke to, but from the people around them. Friends, acquaintances, even the media. Everyone had an opinion on their marriage. The ugly finger of blame had come out, pointing in all directions. Some blamed Theresa for getting caught up in her fame, for prioritizing her gift over her husband. Others blamed Larry, accusing him of being unable to handle a strong, successful woman. The noise was deafening, and yet, in the middle of it all, neither of them had truly addressed the real issue. They had lost each other. The breaking point came in a moment so small that, on the surface, it seemed insignificant. It was a dinner, just the two of them, something that had once been a tradition. Larry had reached for her hand across the table, a gesture that had once felt natural. But instead of meeting him halfway, Theresa had pulled away, not in anger, not in rejection, but in indifference. And that, he realized, was far worse. Indifference is where love goes to die. That night, he had stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying every moment, every argument, every missed opportunity to fix what was breaking. He had always believed that love was enough, that as long as they had history, they would find their way back to each other. But love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice, a series of choices made every single day. And somewhere along the way, they had both stopped choosing each other. Now, as he sat alone in the silence, he faced a question he had never thought he would have to ask. Was there still something left to fight for? Theresa had been distant, but she wasn't cruel. He knew she still cared, in her own way, but was caring enough. Was it possible to rebuild what had been lost, or were they simply holding onto a past that no longer existed? He thought about their children, about the life they had built together. He thought about the years of laughter, of late-night talks, of inside jokes that only they understood. It wasn't all bad. In fact, most of it had been good, really good. But nostalgia wasn't a foundation to build a future on. For the first time in a long time, Larry felt the weight of his own choices. He had spent so much time blaming the circumstances, blaming their differences, blaming the world around them. But blame was just another way of avoiding responsibility. If he wanted to fix this, if there was still a chance to fix this, it had to start with him. The next morning, he found Theresa in the kitchen, her back to him as she poured herself a cup of coffee. He hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "We need to talk." She turned, her expression unreadable.